The sky over the port of Busan ripped open. It did not tear with thunder or the gentle fade of dusk, but with a shriek of tortured physics, a violent purple gash that widened into a gaping maw. From it, the ships descended. They were not graceful. They were blocks of dull, gunmetal gray, massive and utterly impersonal, like floating prison barges. They blotted out the sun, casting the bustling docks, the towering apartment blocks, and the wide expanse of the Gwangan Bridge into a cold, premature shadow. On the observation deck of the Shernan Financial Tower, Kim Jun watched, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. The cool glass of the window did nothing to separate him from the scale of the event. He was a man built for boardrooms and diplomatic cables, his hair more gray than black, his suit impeccably tailored to hide the weariness in his shoulders. Today, the suit felt like a costume. A communicator on the polished table chimed. The holographic image of a Galactic Council overseer, Kale, flickered to life. Kale's features were sharp, avian, with eyes like chips of obsidian. He had no nose, just a series of slit-like nostrils. Delegate Kim. Kale's voice was a dry rustle, translated by the device. The transfer is proceeding. 6 million units as decreed. June did not turn from the window. Below, the first ship had landed with a ground-shaking thud that vibrated up through the building's bones. Ramps extended, not with ceremony, but with a harsh hydraulic hiss. They are people, Overseer Kale, not units. A semantic difference, Kale dismissed. Your planet's persistent, emotional categorization of biological entities is noted. It is, in fact, the root of this corrective action. The first of them emerged. They were tall, painfully thin, their skin a pale, almost luminous gray. They huddled together, wrapped in simple silver thermal sheets that seemed inadequate against the damp Korean sea breeze. They moved slowly, hesitantly, their large, dark eyes wide with a disorientation that went deeper than jet lag. This was the dislocation of a species ripped from a dying world. They were the Valerians. Corrective action, June repeated, the words ash in his mouth. You call dumping 6 million traumatized refugees on a single coastline a correction? Your species' expansion is chaotic. Your cultural output is disruptive. Your insistence on sovereign choice ignores galactic harmony. Kale recited, as if from a manual. The Council offered you structure. You refused. Therefore, you will learn the burden of unchecked responsibility. Managing this crisis will require the resources you so recklessly waste. It is a lesson in humility. On the docks, the scene was unfolding with a nightmarish logic. More ships landed, disgorging more of the silent, shivering Valerians. They were directed by floating council drones that emitted cold, directive lights, herding them into makeshift holding areas marked by glowing lines on the tarmac. There were no welcome signs, no medical tents yet, just vast, open space and a growing sea of lost souls. You expect us to fail, June said, finally turning to face the hologram. That is the real lesson, isn't it? You want the galaxy to see Earth buckle, to see our empathy break under the weight of reality. Kale's head tilted. We expect logic to prevail. Your planet's capacity for sentimental attachment is a documented weakness. The stress test will prove this. The Council's predictions indicate social collapse, resource wars, and eventual begging for our intervention within 3 of your solar cycles. We will, of course, charge a premium for the cleanup. A flash of anger, hot and fierce, burned through June's fatigue. He swallowed it. Anger was what they expected. Irrational, human anger. Instead, he looked back at the view. His city. His people were down there, too. He saw the distant flashing lights of police and emergency vehicles, the news helicopters circling like nervous birds. He saw a group of dockworkers, frozen mid-task, staring at the unfolding spectacle. Your predictions, June said softly, are based on what you know, not on what we are. The transfer will be complete in 72 hours, Kale stated, ignoring him. Council observers will remain to monitor. Do not attempt to refuse the burden, Delegate Kim. The consequences would be severe. The hologram winked out. June was alone with the silent hum of the room and the view of the silent invasion. Down on the ground, a young social worker named Lee So-min was not silent. She was running. Her organization had gotten a vague, frantic alert from the government. Humanitarian crisis, Busan port, all hands. She'd pictured a ferry accident, a fire. This was beyond imagination. She pushed through a cordon of stunned-looking National Guardsmen, her ID badge held high. The cold hit her first, the wind coming off the water. Then the smell, a strange, metallic scent mixed with fear. And then the sound or the lack of it. There was the roar of ship engines, the shouts of officials, the drone of helicopters. But from the Valerians themselves, there was almost nothing. No crying, no gualing. Just a profound, hollow quiet that was worse than any noise. Her professional composure cracked. She stood at the edge of a group of Valerians, her mind blank. What was the protocol? Where did one even start? Her eyes landed on a Valerian female sitting on the ground, back against a cargo container. She was clutching two small children to her sides. All three were shivering violently, their delicate frames racked with tremors. The mother's large, dark eyes were fixed on nothing, a look of pure, exhausted terror. Without thinking, So-min shucked off her own padded jacket, a bright red, puffy thing she'd bought on sale last winter. She stepped forward slowly, movements clear and non-threatening. She knelt, meeting the mother's eyes, and held the jacket out, then gently draped it over the three of them, tucking it around their shoulders. The Valerian mother flinched at first, then stared at the unfamiliar material. Slowly, a faint, almost imperceptible warmth from the residual heat in the jacket seemed to register. She did not smile, but her trembling lessened, just a fraction. One of the children clutched at the soft fabric. A young man nearby, waiting for his delayed shipment to be processed, saw the small act. His phone was already out, recording the surreal scene of the alien ships. He panned and caught the moment. The human woman in a simple sweater, kneeling in the cold, offering her red jacket to the gray-skinned family. He posted it online with two simple words, "The jacket." In his quiet office high above, Kim Jun's own communicator buzzed. It was an aide. "Sir, the first images are hitting the networks. The global reaction is complicated." Jun didn't ask for details. He knew it would be fear, anger, confusion. But he also thought of the dockworkers, not running away but staring, trying to understand. He thought of people like Lee So-min, who were undoubtedly already down there, reacting not with policy, but with instinct. The Galactic Council saw 6 million problems dumped on a shore. They saw a punishment, a neat equation of resource drain leading to societal failure. Kim Jun looked at the vast, vulnerable crowd below, and then at the soaring, familiar skyline of his home city. He took a deep, steadying breath. The lesson had begun. But teachers, he thought with a grim, determined flicker in his heart, could sometimes be surprised by their students. The challenge was not just logistical. It was foundational. It was a test of a world soul, delivered by cold, uncaring stars. And humanity, for better or worse, was now awake for the exam. The world held its breath. News feeds across the planet were a split screen of chaos and analysis. On one side, the endless, somber lines of Valerians streaming from the monstrous ships in Busan. On the other, talking heads in studios argued about economics, security, and galactic law. The word burden was used so often it lost meaning. The weight, however, was very real, and it settled over South Korea like a physical pressure in the Blue House. The emergency cabinet meeting had been going for 14 hours. Maps and data streams glowed on the walls. The numbers were paralyzing. 6 million beings. They needed housing, food, medical care, sanitation. The Valerians' biology was only partly understood. They were susceptible to Earth germs and required a warmer, drier climate than the damp Korean coast offered. The cost projections were numbers with too many zeros. Prime Minister Park, a stern woman with a reputation for fiscal caution, massaged her temples. The UN resolution is a mess of sympathy and panic. Promises of aid, but no coordinated plan. The Americans are debating. The Europeans are forming a committee. The council observers are just watching. Kim Jun, representing the diplomatic front, felt the eyes in the room on him. The Galactic Council's terms are clear. They are our sole responsibility. Sharing the refugees officially would be seen as defiance and give them an excuse for harsher measures. This is a box they have built for us. So we are alone, said the defense minister. Not alone, corrected the Minister of the Interior Choi. He was an older man from Busan originally. We have ourselves, and we have a history of surviving what seems impossible. He pulled up a different set of files. We are not starting from zero. We have the disaster response framework from the Gwangju floods. We have the rapid housing models from the earthquake in Pohang. We adapt them. We scale them. The debate raged. It was about money, about risk, about fear. Then, the Minister of Culture, a quiet woman named Lee, spoke. She shared her screen. It was not a graph. It was the viral image of the jacket. Then another, of a grandmother in a Halmoni's visor, handing a bowl of steaming soup to a confused Valerian youth. Then another, of a group of university students using translation apps on their phones, trying to communicate. The world is waiting for us to collapse, Minister Lee said. Our own people are waiting for a signal. Do we see this as an invasion or as a disaster? Our choice will become their choice. The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of a decision. Prime Minister Park stood. We proceed, not as a global charity case, as a national recovery operation. Minister Choi, you have command. Use every resource. Open the old military bases in the southern regions. The ones with the dry, heated barracks. Commandeer empty Gaziwan residential buildings. We need shelters now. Kim Jun, you handle the galaxy. Feed them reports of our struggle. Let them think we are drowning. But internally, we run this like we are preparing for a storm we intend to survive. The machinery of a modern state, often slow, began to grind into a new kind of motion. It was not smooth. There were protests in some cities, fear-mongering on social media, and desperate calls from mayors who did not want camps in their districts. But on the ground in Busan, something else was building alongside the official response. It was quieter, and it started with the people who were already there. Lee So-min had not stopped moving. She was now coordinating a triage center in a vast, empty warehouse near Pier 8. Doctors and nurses, volunteering in shifts, set up stations. The Valerians were suffering from dehydration, shock, and a strange respiratory distress from Earth's atmosphere. So-min moved between the cots, her red jacket long gone, her sleeves rolled up. She held a Valerian child while a nurse administered fluids, humming a lullaby her own mother had sung to her. The child's large eyes stared at her, the fear slowly being replaced by exhaustion. Outside, a different scene unfolded. A local Jiangsu, a market chief named Mr. Kim who supplied seafood to half the city, rolled up in his truck. He didn't bring fish. He brought pallets of bottled water, boxes of socks, and electric space heaters he'd cleared out of a warehouse. He walked up to an overwhelmed young army lieutenant. "Where do you want it?" he grunted, lighting a cigarette. The lieutenant stared. "Sir, this is a restricted—" "They look cold," Mr. Kim interrupted, blowing smoke. "The heaters are simple. Plug them in. My cousins are coming with more blankets. Just tell us where to go." He looked at the sea of lost faces. His own father had been a refugee once, a lifetime ago, during a war. He didn't say that. He just started unloading boxes. This became the pattern. It was not a grand, organized volunteer corps. It was 1,000 small decisions. A pajamaka tent owner started making simple, bland porridge for Valerians who couldn't digest human food yet. A taxi driver ferried volunteers back and forth for free. A retired engineer showed a group of Valerians how to work a thermostat, using hand gestures and patient smiles. The Galactic Council observers, floating in their sleek aerial pods, recorded it all. They noted the logistical chaos, the shortages, the lines for the toilets. These were the data points they wanted. But they struggled to categorize the other things. the human who gently guided a disoriented Valerian elder by the elbow, the child who offered a stuffed toy. They filed these under inefficient social behaviors. Back in the command center, Minister Choi watched a live feed from a drone. It showed a long convoy of buses, arranged to move the first group of Valerians to a retrofitted military base in the drier interior. The Valerians moved slowly, clutching their thin thermal sheets. "They need real clothes," Choi said to an aide. "Get a textile manufacturer on the phone. We need simple, warm tunics, in gray. Don't make them wear our colors. Let them have their own dignity." That night, Kim Jun received a cold call from Overseer Kale. "Your consumption rates for medical supplies are unsustainable," Kale stated. "The collapse of your systems begins." Jun looked out his window. He could see the lights of the temporary shelters, a new constellation on his country's shore. He thought of the market chief, the social worker, the old engineer. "It's not collapse, Overseer," Jun said, his voice calm. "It's triage. You dropped a boulder in our pond. We are assessing the waves." He paused. "You should look at your own data streams. Look at the non-logistical interactions. That is the variable your predictions missed." "Emotion is not a variable," Kale hissed. "It is noise." "We'll see," Jun said, and ended the call. Below, in a drafty warehouse, Lee So-min finally sat down for the first time in 18 hours. She was drinking a cup of cold coffee. Next to her, on a cot, the Valerian mother from the first day slept, her 2 children curled under a pile of donated blankets. The bright red jacket was folded neatly beside the cot. A silent promise returned. The weight was immense. The path was unclear. But the first rule had been established. They would not be treated as a problem to be managed, but as people who had been shipwrecked. And on this shore, for now, that made all the difference. The world watched and waited, but Busan was no longer waiting. It was working. The first wave of buses moved through the night. They were not comfortable. They were repurposed city buses and long-distance coaches, filled with a silence thicker than the darkness outside. The Valerians looked out the windows at the passing lights of a world that was not their own, their expressions unreadable. Lee So-min rode in the lead vehicle, a government sedan. Her job was to be the familiar face, the anchor point. She watched the alien landscape of highway signs and neon blur past. They were headed for Camp Hope, a name chosen by a hopeful junior minister. It was an old army base near the city of Daegu, its dry climate and empty barracks deemed suitable. When the convoy arrived just before dawn, the scene was not one of polished readiness. Soldiers and civilian workers scrambled under floodlights. They were rolling out lengths of cable, testing portable water units, and directing traffic. There was shouting, and the air was thick with dust and urgency. But there was also movement. Purpose. So-min got out, her muscles stiff. She saw a Valerian family hesitate at the bus door, overwhelmed by the noise and light. She walked over and offered a hand to help them down. It was a simple gesture. The Valerian father looked at her hand, then at her face. Slowly, he took it. His skin was cool and dry. "This way," So-min said softly, leading them toward a long, low building where volunteers were handing out bundles. Each bundle contained a gray tunic, a pair of socks, a simple sleeping pad, and a blanket. Not the silver emergency sheets. Real cloth. Near the entrance to a barracks, an elderly Korean woman in a bright pink vest stood with a large electric kettle and a stack of paper cups. She was making instant soup broth, the steam rising in the cool air. As a Valerian passed, she would bow slightly and offer a cup. Most Valerians took it, cradling the warmth in their long-fingered hands, unsure what to do next. The woman, named Bae Youngja, would then mimic drinking. She would take a sip from her own cup, smile, and say, "Good, warm." It was not about the soup. It was about the ritual. It was about an elder offering comfort. It was a language older than words. Inside the barracks, the work was more technical. Park Min-soo, an architect with the firm hired to redesign the camp, stood in the middle of a cavernous room that smelled of old concrete and disinfectant. His plans were on a tablet, but his eyes were on the Valerians shivering in the space. The geothermal heating for the floor was being installed, but it would take days. They were cold now. The plans call for communal heating zones, his assistant said, pointing at the screen. Park shook his head. He watched a Valerian mother try to warm her child by holding her close. No. They need family units, privacy, dignity. He grabbed a roll of construction tape. We divide the space, temporary walls, sheets, tarps, anything. Give each group a corner, a space that is theirs. He started marking lines on the floor. And get more of those small personal heaters, the ones Mr. Kim donated. One per family space now. It was inefficient. It was not in the original design. But it acknowledged that these were not just bodies to be housed. They were families, they were individuals. The Galactic Council observers saw this as disorganization. They recorded the deviations from the submitted architectural plans, the wasteful use of energy for personal heaters, the ineffective distribution of resources to small groups instead of central hubs. They saw people running, not marching. They saw adaptation, not order. In a different part of the camp, a breakthrough happened by accident. A young electrician named Choi Hyun was struggling to wire a bank of heaters. The instructions were in Korean, and the schematic was confusing. He muttered in frustration, pulling at his hair. A Valerian elder, who had been watching quietly from his assigned family space, slowly approached. His name was Talon. He pointed a long, graceful finger at a symbol on the schematic, then at a component on the heater unit. He made a soft, clicking sound and traced a line in the air between 2 points. Hyun stared. You understand this? Talon could not understand the words, but he understood the tone of questioning. He nodded slowly. He had been an engineer, a maker of things before his world burned. He knelt, his movements stiff, and took the schematic. With a piece of charcoal from a nearby brazier, he drew a clearer, more elegant diagram on the concrete floor, showing the flow of power. Hyun watched, his frustration melting into awe. Oh, he breathed. That's much better. He followed Talon's drawing. In minutes, the heater bank hummed to life, emitting a gentle, radiant warmth. Hyun looked at Talon and smiled, a wide, genuine smile. He pulled out his lunchbox, a simple metal tin with cold rice, kimchi, and a fried egg. He broke the egg in half, placed it on a clean piece of paper, and offered it to Talon. He mimicked eating. Talon looked at the unfamiliar food. He looked at Hyun's smiling face, at the warmth now coming from the heaters. He accepted the paper, picked up the piece of egg, and took a small bite. His large eyes widened slightly. It was strange, salty, but it was food offered in thanks. He gave a slow, deliberate NO translator was needed. A circuit had been completed more important than the one in the heater. It was a circuit of shared skill, of mutual respect. News of such small moments trickled back to the command center in Seoul. Kim Jun read the report about the electrician and the engineer. He didn't see a feel-good story. He saw a data point of immense value. He called Minister Choi. We have been thinking only about what they need from us. But what can they do? What do they know? We must inventory their skills. Teachers, doctors, builders, artists. Integrate them into the work. Give them purpose, not just aid. That evening, the first Valerian working group was formed. Talon, through gestures and Hyun's enthusiastic translation attempts, was asked to help other electricians. He agreed, a faint light returning to his eyes as the sun set, casting long shadows over Camp Hope. The mood was different from the desperate silence of the buses. There was still profound sadness, deep trauma, but there was also the murmur of low voices, the smell of soup, the warmth from 1,000 small heaters. There was the sound of a human child laughing somewhere, and the sight of a Valerian child peeking out from behind a tarp wall. Watching, Lee So-min walked the lanes between the barracks, exhausted but quiet inside. She saw Bae Youngja, the grandmother, now showing a group of Valerian women how to fold the blankets the Korean way. It was a pointless skill, and yet it was everything. It was sharing a piece of home, creating a routine, building a tiny thread of normalcy. The Galactic Council's punishment was a mountain of need. Humanity's first response had been to stop the bleeding. Now they were beginning to build a path one stone at a time. The stones were not grand policies, but a shared meal, a corrected wire, a folded blanket, a moment of understood skill. The foundation, they were starting to realize, was not made of concrete, but of these small, careful connections. The night was still cold, but it was no longer silent. Weeks turned into a month. The frantic emergency of arrival began to settle into the hard, daily work of existence. Camp Hope and the other camps that had sprung up like mushrooms across the southern provinces were no longer just shelters. They were becoming strange, quiet towns. The change was visible in the details. The gray tunics were now often seen with a brightly colored Korean sweater over the top or a donated scarf. Valerian children, their energy returning, played in designated areas. Their games were silent and involved intricate patterns of stones, but sometimes a human ball would roll into their space, and a moment of curious, shared play would happen. The real transformation, however, was happening in the old base's workshops and greenhouses. Park Min-soo's design team had set up a collaborative office in a repurposed hangar. Their blueprints were no longer just human designs. They were hybrids. Talon, the Valerian engineer, had become a regular presence. Choi Hyen, the electrician, was now his permanent partner and translator by gesture. They worked at a large table littered with sketches. Talon would draw with a light pen, creating flowing, organic shapes for building layouts that captured sunlight and heat more efficiently. Park would point to structural requirements, to the limits of Earth materials. Talon would nod, think, and modify his design. It was not easy. There were frustrations, moments where both sides threw their hands up. But they persisted. The first result was a new communal kitchen. It was a low, dome-like structure made from local clay and recycled polymer, with a central ventilation system based on Valerian principles that used less energy. It worked better than the old army kitchen. It was cooler in summer, warmer in winter. The human engineers were fascinated. The Valerians, for the first time, saw a piece of their own knowledge given form in this new world. It was a small piece of home. This pattern repeated elsewhere. In the medical tents, human doctors struggled with Valerian physiology. A Valerian healer, an older female named Lyra, began working with a young Korean doctor, Jiun. Lyra did not have human medicine, but she had a deep understanding of Valerian nerve clusters and energy points. She showed Jiun how certain gentle pressures could ease respiratory distress. Jiun, in turn, showed Lyra how to use a stethoscope, how to read a human thermometer adapted for Valerian skin. They created the first integrated medical guide, a pamphlet of symbols and drawings. Kim Jun in Seoul received these reports. He began to package them not as humanitarian updates, but as technical briefings. He sent them to the Galactic Council, addressed to Overseer Kale. Progress report, thermal efficiency gains from cross-species architectural design. Memo, improvements in patient recovery times using integrated care techniques. He knew Kale would dismiss the human element, so he focused on the results. The numbers, the efficiency gains. He was speaking the council's language, but the story the numbers told was one of collaboration, not collapse. One afternoon, Hyen brought Talon a problem. The geothermal heating for a new housing block was inconsistent. Some rooms were too warm, others too cold. The human systems were too rigid. Talon listened, his large eyes thoughtful. He didn't draw a new schematic. Instead, he asked Hyen for a piece of scrap metal and a tool. For 2 days, he worked alone in a corner of the workshop. He emerged with a device. It was small, made of polished metal and what looked like crystalline filaments. It had no visible controls. He took Hyen to the problematic housing block and placed the device in the central hallway. He tapped it once. A soft humming filled the air. Slowly, evenly, the temperature throughout the entire wing began to balance, settling into a perfect, gentle warmth. It wasn't blowing hot air. It seemed to be gently persuading the existing heat to distribute itself. Hyen was stunned. What is it? Talon made a flowing gesture with his hands, like water finding its level. He pointed to the crystalline filaments, then to the walls, then to the air itself. A heat conductor. Hyen guessed. A smart diffuser? Talon nodded. He picked up the device. It was cool to the touch. He offered it to Hyen. This was different. This was not adapting human technology. This was a piece of Valerian technology, built from scrap. A gift. Park Min-soo was called. He examined the device with reverence. This principle, if we can understand it, scale it. He looked at Talon. Can you show us how to make more? Talon nodded again. He pointed to Hyen, then to the workshop. The message was clear: we can make more. The news sent a ripple through the project. It reached Kim Jun. He saw the report, prototype developed for ambient thermal regulation. Energy savings estimated at 70% over current systems. He didn't just send this to the Galactic Council. He filed a patent, a joint patent, under the names Choi Hyen and Talon of Valeris. It was a legal fiction, but it was a powerful symbol. The invention, born from shared frustration and built from scrap, was now a jointly owned asset of Earth and the Valerian people. When Overseer Kale next made contact, his tone was different. It was not the dry rustle of dismissal. It was sharper, edged with something new: irritation. Your reports are unexpected, Delegate Kim. These efficiency claims are dramatic. They are verified, Kim Jun said calmly. Our teams are learning from one another. The Valerian understanding of biothermal dynamics is remarkable. We are merely providing the tools and materials. You are integrating them, Kale accused. This was not the intended outcome. The refugee dynamic is to be one of drain, not of contribution. Punishment often has unintended consequences. Overseer, Kim replied. You saw them as a burden. We saw them as people. And people have skills. They have knowledge. You tried to break us with a weight. You gave us new hands to help carry it. The call ended coldly. But in the hangar workshop, something warm was growing. Hyen and Talon sat together on upturned crates, sharing a meal. Hyen had brought kimbap. Talon had produced a dense, sweet nutrient bar from his own rations. They traded bite for bite. They did not speak the same language, but they had built something together. They had a shared project, a shared patent, a shared purpose. Around them, the camp was no longer a place of pure misery. It was a place of work, of slow healing, of quiet, cross-species partnership. The punishment had been meant to push humanity down. Instead, humanity had reached out a hand. And to everyone's surprise, especially the Valerians, a hand had reached back, holding not just gratitude, but a gift. 3 months after the ships came, the world's eyes had mostly turned elsewhere. New crises, new scandals. But in Korea, the work had become a kind of normal. Camp Hope was now simply called Waesong Village, a name meaning a city of brightness and integration. The name was hopeful, but the reality was still hard. Yet it functioned. It was a place where life, a different kind of life, was being lived. The video feed from the Galactic Council's observation drone showed exactly this. It circled Waesong Village every day at noon, collecting data. Today, its camera captured the new community garden. It was a mix of earth vegetables and Valerian tubers, planted in alternating rows. Human and Valerian volunteers worked side by side, weeding and watering. There was no soundtrack on the council's feed, so the drone did not capture the sounds. The soft-spoken instructions from a Korean grandmother, the gentle clicking laughter of a Valerian child who had just been shown a wriggling earthworm. The feed was watched by Overseer Kale, millions of miles away on a pristine council station. He did not see cooperation. He saw contamination. The purity of the Valerian species, in the council's rigid view, was being diluted by human ideas, human emotions, human messiness. This was not the lesson. This was a perversion of it. A faction within the council, led by Kale, had been pushing this narrative. They argued that humanity's emotional contagion was a greater threat to galactic order than their expansion. The Valerians were now evidence. They were no longer properly fearful, properly broken. They were building with humans. The decision came down as a cold, bureaucratic order. It was delivered to Kim Jun not by Kale, but by an anonymous council clerk. The document was dense with legal terms, but the meaning was brutally simple. Directive 77 Alpha, Species Reclamation. The Valerian refugee population, having been exposed to uncategorized and destabilizing cultural influences, is hereby recalled for cultural decontamination and reindoctrination on a designated neutral world. Earth's responsibility is considered discharged. Failure to comply will result in a full trade embargo and orbital quarantine. Kim Jun read the words in his quiet office. The air left his lungs. They weren't just taking back their punishment. They were erasing everything that had been built. They were saying the bonds formed, the trust earned, the shared work. All of it was a disease, and they were going to cure it by tearing it apart. He called an emergency meeting. The mood in the secure room was one of cold fury. The defense minister spoke of last-ditch options, of scrambling jets against starships, a futile gesture. The prime minister sat stone-faced, her hands flat on the table. They have given us 72 hours to begin handing them over, like parcels. We can't, Lee So-min said. She was in the room via video feed from Weizong. Her face was pale but set. We can't do it. It would be a betrayal of everything we've done. It would be saying they were never people, just inventory. It would also destroy our economy and isolate our planet, the finance minister said, his voice heavy. Kim Jun looked around the room. They have given us a choice between two betrayals. Betray our new neighbors, or betray our own people's future by inviting an embargo. It is a choice designed to show that empathy always loses to cold logic. What do we do? Prime Minister Park asked. We ask, Kim Jun said. The order was not announced publicly, but in Weizong village, the truth has a way of seeping into the ground. Talon noticed the human workers had become quiet, their smiles strained. He saw Park Min-soo staring at a half-finished housing dome as if he would never finish it. He felt a new tension in the air, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He found Choi Hyen in their workshop. Hyen wasn't working. He was just sitting, staring at the small thermal regulator they had built together. Talon placed a long-fingered hand on his friend's shoulder. Hyen looked up. His eyes were red. He didn't have the words. Instead, he pulled up the council's directive on his tablet, the harsh, alien symbols glowing. He pointed to the symbols for Valerian, then made a sweeping gesture away from Earth, then mimed locking something in a box. His face was a mask of apology and shame. Talon understood. The silence in the room became absolute. He looked at the device they had built, a symbol of what was possible. Then he looked at Hyen, a symbol of what had become real. He straightened his slender frame. He took the tablet from Hyen. He deleted the directive. Then he opened a simple drawing program. He drew two figures, one human, one Valerian. He drew them standing side by side. Then he drew a line around them both, a circle that enclosed them together. He tapped the circle firmly, then pointed to the ground. Here, we stay here. The next day, Kim Jun did not send a diplomatic reply. He sent a live broadcast feed. It was set up in the Weizong community garden. He stood before the camera, but he was not alone. Beside him stood the Valerian mother from the first day on the docks, Alara. She held the hands of her two children, who were now wearing colorful sweaters over their gray tunics. Around them stood a small crowd. Lee So-min, Park Min-soo, Choi Hyen, Talon, Bae Youngja with her soup kettle, Mr. Kim the market chief. Kim Jun spoke simply. Galactic Council, you have ordered us to return the Valerian people. We cannot. They are not ours to give. They are not objects to be recalled. They are our neighbors, our colleagues, and our friends. We will not comply with Directive 77 Alpha. Then he nodded to Alara. She stepped forward. She had learned a little Korean, just phrases. Her voice was soft, but it carried. She spoke to the camera, to the galaxy that had discarded her. You, she said, the word clear. You gave us Cage, called it home. She paused, gathering herself. Then she placed a hand on her chest, then gestured to the humans around her. They gave us home. Call us family. She looked directly into the lens, her large dark eyes holding a strength that had been forged in warmth, not in fire. We stay. The broadcast ended there. No arguments, no legal citations. Just a statement and a testimony that I in his sterile office on the council station. Overseer Kale watched the feed freeze on Alara's face. The silence around him was no longer one of control, but of something slipping away. The punishment had not just failed. It had created a new, powerful, and dangerous thing. A choice freely made by the powerless to stand with the punished. He had no data, no protocol for this. On Earth, the choice was made. The consequences would come. But in Weizong Village, that afternoon, the community garden was weeded, and the children, human and Valerian, were shown how to plant the next season's seeds. They were staying. For now, that was the only work that mattered. The silence from the stars was worse than any threat. For 10 days, Earth waited. The Galactic Council did not respond to Kim Jun's broadcast. They did not send ships. They sent nothing. News networks called it the Quiet Siege. The tension was a wire stretched tight across the planet. Humming with dread that I in soul. The government operated in a state of suspended animation. The promised trade embargo had not yet been declared, but deals were already freezing. Shipments of rare materials from off-world slowed to a trickle. The price of key technologies began to climb. The economic pressure was a silent, creeping frost. But in Weizong Village, the wire of tension was met with a stubborn, quiet warmth. The threat was abstract: orbital quarantines, economic collapse. The need in front of them was not. Valerians still needed to eat. Children still needed to learn. The community garden still needed tending. Lee Somin organized a new program. It was not in any manual. She called it shared shelves. In the center of the village, they set up a large pavilion. Anyone, human or Valerian, could leave something there they did not need. A tool, an extra blanket, a packet of seeds. And anyone could take something they did need. There were no rules, no guards. It was an experiment in pure trust. At first, the shelves were mostly full of human donations. Then, one morning, a beautifully woven basket of pale, sweet Valerian tubers appeared. Then a set of delicate tools for etching stone. The Valerians were giving back. The shelves became a living symbol, a tiny, defiant economy of care in the face of the galaxy's cold economics. Choi Hyen and Talon's work took on a new urgency. Their collaboration was no longer just about comfort. It was about proving value. They huddled over Talon's small thermal regulator. Could its principle be scaled? Could it heat a whole house? A whole village? Park Min-soo brought them blueprints. "Forget the old designs," he said. "We need a new one. A home that is both. Use everything." Together, the three of them, architect, electrician, and Valerian engineer, designed the first true hybrid dwelling. It had a Korean-style heated floor, but its walls were made with a Valerian-inspired composite that breathed and regulated humidity. The roof was angled for solar panels, but its shape also caught and stored ambient heat like Talon's device. It was not purely human. It was not purely Valerian. It was something new. They built a prototype. It used 40% less energy than a standard home of the same size. Kim Jun received the report. He saw not just a house, but a statement. He ordered the plans published openly to the world and to the stars. The Weizong model, he called it, a gift of knowledge offered freely. The Galactic Council's response finally came. It was not a fleet. It was a single, sharp message, broadcast on all channels. To the people of Earth. Your defiance is noted. The embargo begins in 7 solar cycles. Your planet will be isolated. The Valerians are a contaminant. Surrender them and the embargo will be limited. Persist, and your civilization will be designated feral, cut off from all galactic exchange, forever. The word feral echoed in the media. It was meant to shame, to scare. It suggested humanity would be animals, scratching in the dirt. In Weizong, Talon heard the translation from Hyen. He saw the fear on his friend's face. Talon left the workshop. He walked to the community garden. He stood there for a long time, looking at the shared shelves, at the mixed rows of plants. He saw human and Valerian children being led in a simple song by Bei Youngja. The song was about a turtle boat, about resilience. Talon returned to the workshop. He did not go to his bench. He went to the corner where he kept his personal belongings, a small bundle wrapped in a gray cloth. From it, he took a smooth, dark stone and a fine, sharp tool made of a strange, iridescent metal. He sat on the floor and began to work. For 3 days he etched. He did not eat much. He slept little. Hyan brought him food and sat quietly with him, watching the lines grow on the stone. It was not a schematic. It was art. It was a pattern of flowing lines that intertwined, light and dark, separate but connected, rising together into a single, cohesive shape. It was beautiful and profoundly sad, a story of loss and finding, told in silence. On the 4th day, as the world counted down the hours to the embargo, Talon finished. He cleaned the stone and carried it to the village center. He placed it on the shared shelves pavilion right in the middle. Then he stood beside it. People gathered, humans and Valerians. They looked at the stone. They understood. It was not for taking. It was for seeing. Lee Somin felt tears in her eyes. She did not know the Valerian word for art or for legacy, but she understood. He was giving them his story. He was saying, "We were here. This happened." Kim Jun saw the image of the etched stone from a village feed. It broke something open in him. The council saw them as a contaminant. They saw this dot. He asked for a global address. He did not speak from a podium. He spoke from his office, with the image of Talon's stone on the screen behind him. "The Galactic Council calls us feral if we choose to keep our friends," Kim Jun said, his voice tired but clear. "They say we will be animals. But look at this." He gestured to the stone. This was made by a so-called refugee from a dying world. It was given as a gift to a community that chose to share. Is this feral? Is this contamination? He leaned forward. They think their embargo is a weapon. It is a mirror. It shows what they value. Control, purity, silence. Let it show what we value. This stone. This shared shelf. This hybrid house that uses less because 2 people's thought together. We choose the stone. We choose the shelves. We choose our neighbors. Let the galaxy see that choice, and let them call it feral if they wish. We will call it home. The speech did not stop the embargo countdown, but it changed the air on Earth. The fear did not vanish, but it was joined by something else. A solid, stubborn pride. Donations to support the Weizong model poured in from across the planet. Other nations, inspired or shamed, began quietly drafting their own plans for Valerian integration. The embargo would begin. Isolation was coming. But as Talon stood by his stone, watching a human child trace the etched lines with a small, curious finger, he felt it. They were not just staying. They were putting down roots. And roots, once set, are hard to pull from the ground. The galaxy might wall them off, but inside those walls, a new kind of garden was already growing. The embargo began at midnight. There was no dramatic flash in the sky. The stars simply became cold, distant points of light again. The silent streams of data, the trade routes, the soft hum of galactic connection. It all went quiet. Earth was alone with 6 million guests who were now, irrevocably, family. The first months were hard. Certain medicines became scarce. Advanced technologies stalled without off-world parts. The global economy shuddered. But the world did not break. It bent, and in bending, it remembered old strengths. Factories retooled to make what was needed, not what was wanted. Scientists pored over the shared Valerian human designs, learning new principles from first principles in Weizong, now just called Weizong. The first neighborhood of hybrid homes was completed. It was not a camp. It was a town. The streets were laid out in gentle curves, good for walking. The homes had gardens in the front, mixing earth flowers with Valerian light vines. Talon's etched stone stood in a small park at the center, under a protective canopy. Choi Hyan and Talon moved into one of the homes they helped design. It felt strange at first, a house built by 3 minds. The bathroom was a little too tall for Hyan, the kitchen counters a little too low for Talon. But the temperature was always perfect. They hung a copy of their joint patent on the wall, and next to it, a detailed sketch of Talon's stone. They still worked together every day. Their project now was a water purifier, using Valerian crystal filtration and human pumping systems. It was not glamorous work. It was about survival, about making the most of what they had. They spoke a mixed language now, a few words of Korean, a few clicks and gestures of Valerian, and the universal language of engineering. Lee So-min's shared shelves pavilion had grown into a proper community center. It offered language classes both ways. Bae Youngja taught a cooking class on how to make nutritious stews with earth and Valerian ingredients. Mr. Kim, the market chief, had set up a small distribution hub, ensuring the village's surplus vegetables made it to other integrated communities. One afternoon, a formal diplomatic packet arrived from the remnants of the Galactic Council. It was not for Kim Jun. It was addressed to the Weizong Cooperative. Kim Jun brought it himself, handing the data crystal to So-min, Hyen, and Talon in the community center. They played it. It was Overseer Kale. He looked older, his sharp features drawn. The backdrop was not the gleaming council chamber, but a simpler room. His voice held none of its old dry rustle. It was tired. "This communiqué is unofficial," Kale began. "The council is in debate. Your embargo was meant to be a final lesson. It has become an observation." He paused, as if choosing words carefully. "We predicted societal collapse. We observe localized hardship and global innovation. We predicted resource wars. We observe new resource-sharing models. We predicted the Valerians would be a drain. We see them contributing." The words seemed to pain him. "The Weizong model and its derivatives are being studied. Your thermal regulator patent has been independently verified. It is elegantly efficient." He looked directly into the camera. "The Council's position on your defiance cannot change. The embargo stands. But there are factions now. They ask a question we did not prepare for. What if empathy is not a weakness, but an untapped catalytic force? We have no answer. You are living it. This message is a request for the blueprint of your water purifier, not as a demand, as an exchange. We can offer schematics for a low-energy plasma forge." The message ended. The room was silent. They had expected threats, not a request. "They're asking us?" Hyen said, incredulous. Talon made a soft clicking sound, his version of a thoughtful hum. He pointed to the crystal, then to his own head, then made a wide, opening gesture with his hands. "They're learning?" So-min translated softly. Kim Jun smiled, a real, deep smile that eased the lines on his face. "They tried to punish us with a burden. We turned it into a bridge. And now they are curious about what's on the other side. They sent the water purifier plans. They received the forge schematics in return. It was not peace. It was not an end to isolation. It was a crack in the wall, a single careful thread of connection based not on power, but on mutual interest, on the value of an idea." Years later, Weizong was a small, thriving city. The first children born there, true hybrids of culture if not biology, were starting school. They learned two histories, of a world that burned and a world that opened its arms. They sang songs in Korean and in Valerian click poetry. On a quiet evening, Hyen and Talon sat on the porch of their home. Talon was etching a new stone, a smaller one. Hyen was reviewing plans for a new school wing. The light vines on their trellis glowed with a soft, blue light as dusk settled. Above, the stars were still silent. The embargo was technically still in effect. But every now and then, a new data packet would arrive from a certain faction within the Galactic Council. A request, an exchange, a question. Hyen looked up at the stars, then at his friend, content in the pool of gentle light from their home. "You know," he said in his simple mixed language, "they thought they were dumping a problem on us." Talon finished a line on his stone. He looked at Hyen, then at the warm, lit windows of their neighborhood. He made a gesture he had learned from Bae Youngja long ago. A slow, nodding bow of the head, deep with respect. It meant many things. Thank you. I see you. We are here. The punishment had been meant to teach Earth a lesson about its place in the cold universe. And it had. It taught them that their place was wherever they chose to build a home, and that a home was made not by walls, but by the hands, human and otherwise, that built them together. The galaxy had given them a stone of burden. Humanity and their friends had chosen to carve it into something better. And from that first simple choice, a new world was growing one quiet, steady day at a time.